What's good, y'all? How we doing? How we doing? How we doing? So, as y'all know, I made my video a couple months ago talking about Kawhi Leonard, or maybe it was a month and a half ago, or whatever. I posted that video in June. I talked about Kawhi Leonard potentially returning to the Toronto Raptors based off of like a trade and like some of these articles that talk about him potentially reuniting with either them or the San Antonio Spurs. We just recently saw both of them have their uh, respective postseason success. Obviously, the Raptors took James Harden, Donovan Mitchell, and the Cleveland Cavaliers to a Game 7 when no one really expected them to, and they had no business taking them to a Game 7 anyway because they didn't have Brandon Ingram nor Emmanuel Quickly in that series. And then the San Antonio Spurs, we just recently saw them flame out in the NBA Finals. And then the bombshell dropped. Kawhi Leonard actually got traded to Toronto for Brandon Ingram and Grady Dick and a few first-round picks. But everything came to a screeching halt when the rise of that aspiration scandal that I talked about in that video I made about Kawhi started to arise again. Again, if y'all missed it, I'm going to talk about the aspiration scandal here. I talk about it in that Kawhi video and my Kawhi video I made about at the beginning of the 2025-26 season. Kawhi, when he signed his contract with the LA Clippers, he agreed to a $28 million cash agreement, which basically Steve Ballmer and another guy that's in jail. I don't know who that guy's name is. I know there was someone who was a part of that scandal who got thrown in jail because of fraud. They were slipping $28 million under the table, which basically he tried to do this whole thing with trees or whatever, where he plants trees, and he went to the Philippines or whatever to like donate to charity or whatever I have you. There's a lot of details in this case that is kind of, not popping up in my head, but this is just based on based on everything that I do know. Basically, that $28 million cash agreement required Kawhi not to do his job. That's essentially what it was. No actual promotional work and no attending the facilities for the Clippers or whatever the hell was going on there. Pablo Torre, who's been covering this case when it was on the uprise, suggested that this $28 million cash agreement or whatever, and possibly more, was circumventing the NBA salary cap. And because of that and a whole bunch of new details that arose within the investigation, especially throughout the summer, it caused the Raptors and the Clippers to halt that trade because the Raptors do not want to inherit any consequence with losing draft picks or losing some money from the salary cap. I think that's probably one of their punishments, but whatever. They didn't want to inherit any punishment from what they were going to get when they complete that trade with the Clippers. I'm going to read y'all a couple articles, one from basketballnetwork.net and the other from basketnews.com. They both talk about the aspiration scandal and Kawhi Leonard and what potential consequences there could be coming for Kawhi, or that could come for Kawhi, I meant to say, and potentially the LA Clippers and maybe the Toronto Raptors if they do follow through with the trade. Because there is a legit chance that because of all this stuff going on with Kawhi and his camp and the whole scandal, the Raptors trade could definitely fall through and Kawhi would be a Clipper at the start of the 2026-27 season. So, in this article, it states, according to Torre, he did not stop investigating after uncovering the aspiration deal because the Clippers shortly thereafter extended Kawhi with a below-max contract. Knowing how every cent matters to Kawhi and his uncle Dennis, Pablo said he ended up discovering a second bogus deal. Pablo Torre says, if you just put all this together, a guy who truly is here to earn as much as he possibly can and beyond decides to take less from the Clippers to extend in January of 2024, while also being owed money from this team's sponsor, Aspiration, which, according to the bankruptcy filing which we obtained, owes him at least $7 million. And so why and how he does that is what leads me to this story on Daktronics, explained Pablo Torre on the Dan Patrick Show. Largest cap circumvention scheme in sports. One may recall at the start of 2024, Kawhi was eligible for a 4-year max contract worth $223 million. However, he opted to sign a 3-year deal worth $153 million with a max salary of $52 million for the 2024-25 season and $50+ million more each of the next 2 seasons, last season, and then this upcoming 2026-27 season. At the time, many lauded Kawhi for taking less money to make way for other players on the team to be paid. a la Jalen Brunson of the New York Knicks and what we saw with Victor Wembanyama and the San Antonio Spurs. I have my video talking about Wemby. But as Pablo Torre claims, Kawhi had another bogus endorsement deal that may or may not have covered up his losses. Pablo, however, admitted he does not know yet the specifics of the Daktronics deal, but was told by his source it was a multi-million-dollar deal, which, if added to the money he made from Aspiration, would make it a significant figure. We do not know how many millions were in the Daktronics deal. We are, of course, actively interested in finding out that number. But when you're talking about what he was paid beyond the cap, we're talking about the largest alleged salary cap circumvention in the history of sports. And this is the last part of the article where the Clippers have completely stopped responding to Pablo about this whole Aspiration scandal. Pablo Torre also told Dan Patrick when he started his expose, the Clippers were initially open to scrutiny, and every time Pablo Torre hit them up to respond to the allegations, they always gave him at least a statement. However, since the investigation into Aspiration began, they have refused to respond to his communication. The Clippers have stopped responding to our requests for comment. We will tell them what's going to be in the episodes. For months now, they've stopped responding. They used to say stuff like, this is probably false. I learned the history that words are very carefully chosen by lawyers, blah, 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 blah. It's unclear what happens to the Aspiration investigation, but later in the interview, Pablo Torre says that, as crazy as it sounds, team owner Steve Ballmer is getting away unscathed from this scandal. Pablo did not explain any further, but not only Steve is the richest owner in the NBA, he can afford the best legal team available. But penalizing one team could also open up a can of worms across the league. That's very interesting because there are a lot of scandals that have happened outside the Kawhi Leonard scandal. You look at what's been going on with the Malik Beasley case with the whole gambling thing. And then I believe there was one other player in the league that gambled, or maybe it was just Malik Beasley, I don't know. But there have been scandals in the past, maybe not of this magnitude. And here is an article that talks about a major Kawhi Leonard Aspiration update. Kawhi reportedly believes that the NBA's ongoing investigation into the LA Clippers will be completed before training camp begins. According to Jake Fisher of the Skyline, the 7-time All-Star remains on course to join the Toronto Raptors despite the uncertainty surrounding the league's investigation into the allegations of the salary cap circumvention involving Kawhi and the Clippers. The LA Clippers, meanwhile, are prepared to pursue arbitration depending on the severity of any penalties imposed by the NBA once the investigation's complete findings are reviewed. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver said in a mid-July press conference at Summer League in Las Vegas that he could not provide a firm timetable for the investigation. When asked when he expected clarity on Kawhi's situation, Adam Silver said that only he anticipated a resolution this upcoming summer. The article stated the Clippers are prepared for possible arbitration. The investigation has become an important factor in Kawhi's proposed move to Toronto, but latest indications suggest that he still expects the situation to be resolved before training camp. Now, I want y'all to keep that in mind because there are some posts on Instagram, maybe, you know, don't believe everything you see on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter or whatever. But there was a post on IG that suggested that this Aspiration scandal could leak into 2027. Or it could spill over into 2027. But with this type of update, it may be false depending on how the NBA and Kawhi's camp and the FBI go forward with this. It's very dependent on that, in my personal opinion. LA could challenge the NBA's eventual decision if the organization believes the penalties are excessive. Sources told Jake Fisher that the Clippers are prepared to go to arbitration depending on what sanctions the league office ultimately orders after reviewing the investigation. Pablo Torre reported on his podcast, Pablo Torre Finds Out, that Kawhi had allegedly an undisclosed lucrative sponsorship agreement with Daktronics. We just talked about that in the previous article. However, according to Jake Fisher, and by the way, you guys can just pause to read these if you want to, but I'm just going to skip over that because we already talked about it in the other article. However, according to Jake Fisher, those developments were not new discoveries for NBA's investigators. The Watchell law firm, which is conducting the league's investigation, had reportedly already been examining both the alleged Daktronics agreement and Kawhi's Rhode Island soccer investment before Pablo Torre's reporting became public. The Athletic previously reported in mid-July that investigators had looked into a previously unreported endorsement deal with another company. So what are my thoughts on this? Obviously, this investigation is going to take a solid while before anything is complete. But we also have something, I don't want to play the clip, but we also have something from Stephen A. Smith saying that, look, if all these things are true, the Clippers should void Kawhi's contract, ban Steve Ballmer from attending games, and ban Kawhi from playing next season. Basically give him the O.J. Mayo treatment, even though O.J. was suspended for the league's drug policy, whereas Kawhi will be basically banned for fraud. But I can't imagine Adam Silver going that far, which is what Stephen A. said, and I do personally feel like that, because y'all gotta remember, Steve Ballmer is one of the richest owners in sports, and he is one of the bigger reasons why the NBA has a big amount of profits. Obviously, you have, the Lakers with, like, Rob Pelinka and Jeannie Buss, and then you have plenty of, like, sponsorships and TV deals that is generating a lot of revenue, and then fans coming into the games and all that other stuff. I get that. But Steve Ballmer is a top 3 reason, in my opinion, on why the NBA is making so much money. So I don't think they are going to give Steve Ballmer any type of, massive punishment, as I think they probably would for Kawhi, but there is a possibility that the punishment would be just like a 25-game suspension. Think of Ja Morant when Ja was playing with, some weapons in his car. And there's a comment that I want y'all to listen to. I'm not going to showcase it here. You could just type up Kawhi Leonard Reddit. This comment basically sums up my thoughts in a nutshell. After the Joe Smith under-the-table deal, the Minnesota Timberwolves forfeited 5 first-round picks, fined $3.5 million, voided the contract, and suspended the owner from operations for a year. This case is much worse than that, but Ballmer is the richest owner in the league, and they'll give him what he wants. And there's one guy that says that this should be the minimum starting point, as it sets a rule of precedent. Now, if you guys don't know who Joe Smith is, Joe Smith was a power forward that played in the NBA for 16 seasons from 1995 to 2011, ending his career with the LA Lakers. He was one of LeBron's teammates with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Joe Smith was basically LaMarcus Aldridge with Naz Reid's athletic ability, or Daniel Gafford's athletic ability. Pure mid-range jumper, good shot blocker, guy can jump out of the gym like crazy, but for what he was worth, he was basically another version of, Ben Simmons or Michael Carter-Williams. But he obviously had a longer career than both MCW and Ben Simmons combined, so I probably can't say that. But that's not the point. The point is, when the Joe Smith case arose the way it did, it wasn't this egregious to a point where it's just like, you had a Pablo Torre type of guy back in the 1990s finding out that, okay, Joe Smith had shady organizations working for him or whatever the heck is going on there. It's just a salary cap circumvention that just basically slipped money under the table. It's still bad, but it wasn't this level of bad. The punishments that were listed in the Joe Smith case, based on that one comment I read y'all, was very appropriate. And I feel like that there should be a genuine punishment when it comes to Kawhi Leonard, Steve Ballmer, and the whole Aspiration scandal. Meaning that Kawhi is probably not going to play in the league for 2026-27, which honestly, I don't agree with Stephen A. on everything, because that guy is a buffoon when it comes to his analytics, and his political takes are kind of trash too, because he is a dog whistler for, who. But I do agree with Stephen A. Smith on that there should be a reasonable, fair, and harsh punishment when it comes to messing up and tampering with the salary cap in the style that Kawhi did. Because this is a legit case of fraud. And there is a potential that, or maybe not even a potential, maybe there's an off chance that Kawhi Leonard might do some time in prison because of that. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I will not be surprised if it does. You know what I mean? And I feel like a couple of those consequences that Stephen A. Smith named off should absolutely happen. They should definitely hit the Clippers in the salary cap, and they should forfeit a good amount of draft picks or whatever they have left with the trades involving Darius Garland and James Harden, and then the Benedict Mathurin deal. But regardless of all of that, no one should get off of this scot-free, even if you are the richest owner in the league and one of the richest owners in sports in Steve Ballmer. But I have a feeling that Adam Silver is going to give Steve Ballmer a slap on the wrist, and it may or may not be right, depending on how y'all view it, but there should be a genuine fair punishment when it comes to Kawhi Leonard. I'm going to leave that to y'all. What do you guys think the ultimate outcome will be in this case? I felt like I wanted to talk about something because I don't want to keep spacing out my videos week by week. I definitely want to be as consistent as I've been throughout the NBA playoffs and then throughout this offseason, where I talked about a lot of things in June. Now where it's just like we're in the more dead parts of the offseason. So expect a lot of random videos at some point in time or whatever the case may be. I love y'all. I'll see y'all next time. That's the end of this video. I'm X. Deuces.